Do you remember your first brush with death? And I'm talking about your first up close and personal kind of encounter. I was around 7 years old, closer to God perhaps then than ever before, and maybe even since. My grandmother was in her mid-80s, my mom's mom, and she was very sick and she was dying and she was in the hospital. And my mother was determined. I don't know what the rules were at the time and for the hospital, but I have a hunch children in the hospital was frowned upon. But my mother was determined that we were going to visit our grandmother one more time. The year was 1983, and it was Easter Sunday. And my siblings and I, we had worshiped at First United Methodist Church in Amory, Mississippi. And we visited, dressed in our Easter scratchiest, most confining outfits possible. We walked into Gilmore Memorial Hospital, and we went into my grandmother's hospital room. And I remember she was lying in a bed, and she was pale, as I recall, a little yellow in color, and she had her feet propped up, elevated on what my mother told me was a box of diapers. All these years I thought those diapers were for babies. But this week I've been thinking, I have no idea what age those diapers were for. What I do remember is the weight. I remember the heavy weight in the room that I felt, inside and out. And my grandmother, she adored us. She called us her little angels, and she oohed and awed over us as she always did. But this time I could tell it was taking more energy and strength for her than ever before. And 12 days later, she was gone, dead. Never again has my life been the same. It changed. Faith, the assurance of things hoped for, and the confidence of things not seen was suddenly mine to have and to hold up in hope. And here's what I've learned over the years. Trust, my friends. Trust the deepest knowings and intuitions of your heart when it comes to life and death and life beyond death. Trust the deepest knowings and intuitions of our human hearts. The late great preacher Fred Craddock, some have said that he was one of the best preachers and Christian storytellers in the 20th century. And in the mid-1980s, this preacher was invited to preach a sermon during the Easter season to a congregation. And to a group of people gathered much like you are today, this minister preached with all the conviction he could pull together. He shared with those who were listening. He said to them during the Easter season, he said, "Don't waste Easter." Say that with me. Don't waste Easter. And then this preacher went on to tell a story about a particular congregation on Easter Sunday and how every single year this church would decorate its sanctuary with Easter lilies. 500 Easter lilies. And sometimes they were scattered throughout the sanctuary. But on this particular Easter Sunday, they were arranged in the shape of a cross right in the chancel area. 500 Easter lilies, and it was a sight to behold. Now, for this particular church, you need to know that this was a memorial fundraiser. We in the church are always looking for ways to promote and encourage you to be extra generous. And because this was a memorial fundraiser, each lily was purchased and given in memory of someone. And so inside the bulletin that Sunday, there was an insert with 500 names listed. And this will tell you how old the story is. Each lily cost $5. We're talking about 500 Easter lilies, $5 each. And it was a sight to behold. But in the 16th year, this tradition came apart. When a woman, at the close of the service, right after it was over, this woman came up to the chancel area and she said to the preacher, "A friend of mine is in the hospital. She wasn't able to make it to church, and so I'm going to go and visit her. I'm going to take her a bulletin with an insert with all those names listed. Do you mind," she asked the preacher, "if I take one of these Easter lilies?" There were so many, remember? 500 Easter lilies, $5 each. So there were plenty to go around. They all looked alike. And so he said, "Sure." And so she went to grab an Easter lily and she gasped, "Oh!" Just like that. And those who were lingering after the service in the sanctuary turned toward her, and then she exclaimed and said, "They are plastic." "These Easter lilies," she said, "they are plastic." And you can imagine this caused quite the stir in the congregation. And so committees formed and huddles gathered. Some were formal, some were informal. And the point was made. We have given $5 apiece for an Easter lily for 16 years, and they were the same lilies. And then there were those who began to count the cost, people like Mike O'Neill and Diane Havard. And they said, "We figure that we have given in this church around," I hope I got my math right, around $40,000 for the same Easter lilies. Now this minister in the hot seat decided he better explain himself. So he began to say, "I have to share with you that we have stored these Easter lilies in a cool, dry place year after year. And every single year we bring them out, and ever so carefully we dust them off and we clean them. We even polish them." And then he went on to say that the proceeds, every gift given for these Easter lilies had gone to a good cause. The benevolence fund, to all those people needing assistance throughout the year when it wasn't in the church budget, we were able to support those needs. And scholarships, Mike, we've been able to afford supporting all these seminary students and college students with the funds that were donated. And then he said, when we needed to advertise for the church, hint, 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 25% of our offering will go towards our website. But we're back to 1980-something. The minister said, "These donations have gone to advertise our church in the community, to let them know what good things we've been up to." And some were nodding their heads. They were for it, these plastic lilies. But you know how church goes. There were others shaking their heads. They were not for it. And so finally, this minister decided to give a theological defense. And he said to those gathered, he said, "Plastic lilies are appropriate to Easter because they always bloom, and they never die. Friends, is that true? Is that how the resurrection works? Is that the real meaning of Easter? In John's Gospel, the 12th chapter, the last week of Jesus' life has already begun, and the people have gathered for the festival. They have waved their palm branches and shouted, "Hosanna in the highest," when some Greeks, that means people outside the faith tradition, some Greeks have gathered and they asked some of Jesus' disciples, "Sir, we wish to see Jesus." And then Jesus, master teacher, decides to give an explanation. Jesus knows what's in store, the cross, the resurrection, and so he tries to explain to those with ears to hear the meaning of what's about to unfold. And according to the Message Bible translation, this is what Jesus says. Listen carefully, he says, and he's going to pull on an agricultural metaphor too. He says, unless a grain of wheat is buried in the ground, dead to the world, it is never anything more than a grain of wheat. But if it is buried, it sprouts. It reproduces itself many times over. And then he says, really pay attention to these words here. In the same way, anyone who holds on to life just as it is destroys life. But if you let it go, reckless in your love, you'll have it forever, real, and eternal. And the lesson in a nutshell, it seems to me, is there is no Easter without what, friends? Death. It seems to me, we decorate our sanctuaries and our necks with the symbol of the cross. What if we decorated with the symbol of the empty tomb? What's more scandalous? Dying Jesus or dead Jesus? I think we have to be careful, though, not to put too much distance between Good Friday and Easter Sunday, because both, if we're wanting to get the meaning of the resurrection, both are necessary. Acts, the 5th chapter, reminds us, Jesus, whom you killed by hanging him on a what? Tree. Hear this, friends. The God of our ancestors, the God of our faith ancestors, raised him from the dead. Jesus was dead, D-E-A-D. We don't want to waste Easter by forgetting that. And so, on behalf of God and this church and the gospel, I am here this morning to remind you where Easter begins. Easter begins in a tomb. Early in the morning, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went where? To the tomb. And when she saw that the stone had been rolled away from the tomb, she went to tell the other disciples. And Peter and John, they run towards the tomb to confirm it. And when they find that there is no body, they go back to business as usual. But Mary Magdalene remains. She's lingering. She remains at the tomb. And she's crying. We're told 4 times in 4 short verses that Mary is crying. I think the writer of John's Gospel wants us to notice that she's overwhelmed with sorrow and grief and despair. And then we are told while she is crying, she stoops down in a posture of humility and prayer. And she leans in to the tomb. And then there are these messengers of God, these angels, and they say to her, "Why? Why are you crying?" And she says, "They have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have put him." In other words, she's saying, where is she? Who hasn't asked the same kind of question? Where is my loved one? Where are they? And then she turns, Mary. She turns around and she sees a man, and just like Parma told us, she thinks it's the gardener. And then this man calls her by name, Mary. And then she knows. She's able to see in full the master teacher, she calls him Rabboni, the living Lord. But it's not the same. Because you got to remember this, church. Resurrection is not about preserving the past. It's about transforming the future. And so the risen Lord says to her, "Do not hold on to me." Do you hear that, church? Do not hold on to me. But rather, Jesus tells Mary, go and tell my brothers and sisters, go and tell them that I'm going up to the Father, your Father, to my God, your God. And guess what she does? She goes. Off she goes. Mary Magdalene, do you know anything about her? She was a woman, which in those days meant she had zero power, no clout whatsoever. She had a sketchy reputation, and if you know her story, she was riddled with demons that she herself had to overcome. Yet she goes. She's the first to proclaim the promise of the risen Christ. She is the first apostle, the apostle of the apostles, and never again has this world been the same. Which is unlike, so unlike these lilies that I bought just this past Holy Week. And you're not going to believe it. I found these Easter lilies on sale each for $4.99. It's the truth. Don't you think I got quite the bargain? Quite the steal? Problem is, they're not real. They're plastic. And if it cannot die, it cannot bloom. So don't waste it. This Easter, 2,025 years later, don't waste Easter. Instead, lean in, let go, and let God lead you into life. So be it, and so it is. Amen.